Hey, what's up? David Cohen here for Learn Now Effects, and welcome back to another exciting Fusion tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to be making some interesting new transitions inside of Davinci Resolve. And not only that, these are going to be transitioned with some chromatic aberrations in them. And I'm going to be showing you how to create these chromatic aberrations very easy, very simply, and without taking much time at all. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag our media into the media pool. So we have two clips here, and I'm going to put the city first. Let's put this one. These are just random clips I got from pixabay.com, and you can use, if you're making transitions, you probably already have the footage to use when you make them. So I'm just gonna, one second, I'll take this back, turn this on, this snapping, and I'm going to drag this mountain again. All right, now it snaps right where it's supposed to. So this audio is really not necessary. I'm just going to get rid of it for the sake of this tutorial, but you'd want to leave the audio, of course. So I'm just going to unlink and then cut. So let's zoom in to the part where the two clips meet. We want to grab an adjustment clip, and we want to make it 6 frames long. So what I'm going to do to reference 6 frames, because the frames here work different in Fusion, because frame 0 counts as a whole frame and the last frame doesn't count as a frame. So it's a very interesting way they decided to make it. So I'm just gonna make a Fusion composition, make it 0 seconds, but 6 frames long. So I'm just gonna click on create, and we're working in 4K, 24 frames a second at the moment. So I'm just gonna drag this Fusion composition, put it on top of this, and I'm going to make this adjustment clip about the length of the Fusion comp. Alright, I'm just gonna zoom in here. As we can see, it's exactly the same length, so I'm just gonna cut this Fusion composition. We don't need it anymore. Now I'm going to zoom out again, and I'm going to drag this right here. Now let's put the CTI here. Zoom in again with this bar over here. Now we need to turn off snapping so we can position this right in the middle. Well, this is more or less in the middle. As I said, the last frame doesn't count and frame 0 does, so that's about the middle. So we select this adjustment clip, and we can head on over to the Fusion tab. Alright, now that we're in our Fusion tab, I'm going to drag this media out node to the corner. It's not like we need many nodes at all, so I probably shouldn't do that, but it's just a force of habit. So I'm going to right click and select Arrange Tools to Grid, and also Options, I'm going to select Orthogonal Pipes. Alright. So first thing we want to do is we want to grab a transform node here from the toolbar. Let's look at this. All right. So here we are at frame 0. Just a second. It'll take a while to conform with this whole thing here. And I'll close the effects library. All right. So here's our first clip. We go to the second frame, third frame. And here, I think it's already going to become the next clip. All right. So we're going to go here, and I'm going to animate the size because there's going to be a zoom in transition. And here I'm going to bring the size to about 5. All right, I'm just going to zoom out so we see what we're working with. Now in the next frame, I'm going to take the size and make it 0.5, and I'm going to select edges as mirror. All right, that looks kind of weird at the moment. And I'm going to go to the last frame, and I'm going to bring the size to default, and it'll automatically create a keyframe because we created that keyframe in the beginning. So this is our default size right now. Now, what we want to do, something interesting, we go to this transform node, select it, and we go here to this tab, and we select motion blur, and we check it. And the quality, let's bring it to 5, maybe. So this natural looking motion blur that we just enabled, but we're not done yet. Motion blur is nice, of course it is, but we can add something else to make it look even cooler. There's a great fuse from Reactor called XF Chroma, and in case This looks familiar. Every time I try to search for a transform, let's say I type XF, that's the shortcut for transform, and this ends up coming up instead. So I'm just going to add this here. And if it looks familiar here, this is basically the same as a transform node, but it does something a little different. I'm going to go to the first frame, and I'm going to animate the size. I'm going to go here to this frame, and I'm going to bring up, let's say, the size, and you're about to see what it does. It creates these really cool looking chromatic aberrations. Alright, so here are chromatic aberrations that I was talking about. This is a really cool fuse, very cool fuse, and it works very well. It's an oldie but goodie. It's not the newest fuse, and it works pretty well. So if you want to see how it works with more detail, I'm just gonna bypass this transform for a second just to show you how it works. So if you look at it like that, oh yeah, the transform was taking so long because we activated the motion blur. So if you look at this, we have these cool looking chromatic aberrations, just like that, created from this fuse. Now, if we were going to make this into a, let's say, a spin transition, right? So if I wanted to make it a spin transition, search for XF chroma, add this, and if it was going to be a spin transition, I would just modify the angle, and it would make a different type of chromatic aberration. See? But this is like pretty strong. It's like we don't even need that much. We need maybe like 1 degree barely. It needs to be like very subtle, so you only notice it a little bit. So if you look at it, you have these little chromatic aberrations, very little. So in the center, you hardly have any, but towards the end, like a natural chromatic aberration, you have a lot. This looks like something you would typically try to get rid of, but when it comes to transition, it works pretty well. So if I set the angle to 3, you guys would see how this works. Alright, so here it is. And if it was going to be a whip pen transition, you would modify the angle. So I'm just going to click on Control, and I'm just going to move this a little bit. Now we zoom in and we have this. This is what you would do for a whip pen transition. I'm just going to right click or just double click it. Yeah, so this works pretty well. This is a great fuse. You can get this on Reactor, and it's free. I'm pretty sure there's an optional donation as well, but it's a very great fuse if you're making transitions, and it has lots of different things you can do with it. You have size, you have aspect, angle, center. That's basically most of your transitions right there. We go here to the last frame and we bring the size back to where it was. Alright. And that should fix it all. So the transform is taking so long because of this motion blur. So one thing you can do if you don't want to use the motion blur, because this is pretty slow, so I'm just going to uncheck this for a moment. This is pretty slow. So if I was going to use, let's say, a zoom blur node, that would work a lot faster. It wouldn't be as natural as if you were going to use the motion blur from the transform. So I'll go to frame 0, animate the strength, change the border type to reflect, go to the last frame, also animate the zoom strength. Sorry, oh yeah, set key. But the one thing I forgot to mention is that this has a strength on by default. So when you set this to 0 here and 0 here, and in the frame in the middle, we're going to make it something like this. So we have some motion blur. It looks pretty good, and you won't even be able to notice it because this is over the course of 6 frames, so it's not that big of a deal. So what we can do, we can add the zoom blur before the XF chroma fuse, see if that changes anything. Yeah, changes a little bit, but not that bad. So we're almost done with this transition. I'm going to be showing you how to make another couple transitions in this same video because I don't want to make lots of videos. This is just a general video on how to make these transitions, and I wanted to introduce you guys to this cool tool. So I'm just going to select transform size, zoom blur, XF chroma all at the same time. because they all happen over the course of the same frame. So I'm just going to click this fit button. And as we can see, we have this very weird looking curve. What we can do, we can select all of this and click Shift S. And I would start playing with these little handles here because these are Bezier splines and you can play with them as much as you want to get a cooler effect. But since this is over the course of 6 frames, you just want it to ease in and ease out. You won't really notice a difference because 6 frames is just like a blink. It's like quarter of a second, so you won't even notice this. All right. So if I wanted to make this a zoom out transition, the only thing I would have to do is go to this transform node. Okay, so let me just show you what's going on now. This transition is practically done. So if we would go here, all right, so we'd go 1 frame forward, another frame forward, another frame forward, another frame forward. All right. So as we can see, there's just one small thing that I would have corrected. The 5, like when we set it at the beginning to 0 and in the middle to 5 with the buildings, we set it a little bit too hard. I set it too hard. So I should probably go back and make it, instead of 5, make it maybe 2, because that would be more balanced. It would look a lot better. All right. So it looks pretty well. So we have 3 frames in the beginning and 3 frames in the end. So I know it looks bad now, but when it plays fast, you can really have a really decent playback and it looks pretty well. Alright, so if I wanted to make this a zoom out transition, like it to zoom out, for it to zoom out, I would take this transform, I would go to this keyframe, make it 0.5, and at this keyframe, make it 2. That's it. I mean, of course, you could play with the zoom blur a little bit, you could play with the XF chroma fuse a little bit. Also, you could go here to the middle, to the XF chroma fuse, make it small instead of big, but that's basically it. So let's try to play this back. First thing I want to do is I want to right click here on this play bar, turn off high quality, turn off motion blur, and turn on auto proxy. All right, so I'm just gonna go here. All right, so you don't have the option to mirror edges. That would have been a nice option, but let's just see how well this goes. Yeah, so this XF chroma fuse, we should probably leave it to make it larger instead of smaller. Even though it would have been more realistic to have it smaller, but the edges you can expose the alpha channel with the edges, so that's not a good idea. I believe it was 1.5 in the beginning, so we'll leave it at 1.5. And there we are. So it's a ready zoom out transition. So let's just, yeah, so it's pretty hard to play back, but when it renders like that. So all right, so we can get rid of all of this and we can make this a spin transition, or we can leave that for a future video. I think what we can do, we can go to this transform. All right, so this is ready. We already made 2 transitions so far for you guys to remember. So I'm gonna go to the size and I'm going to set it to default or remove transform size. This is the path, so it's not gonna have any animation anymore. The zoom blur, we don't need it anymore because we're making a different type of transition. So I'm just gonna cut this. We don't need it. And for the XF chroma, I'm also gonna remove the path for the size. Remove XF chroma, one fuse, one size. That's the path. That's the spline that we were playing with. So that's gone. We bring this to the center. All right. So one thing we can do, we can go to the beginning, to the first frame, and we can animate the center. So this is going to be more of a whip pen transition. Go to this third frame, bring it to the side. Yeah. So we should just be looking at this transform at the moment. So I'm going to move this here, and we have a completely new city at the moment. Now, we are going to go here to the next frame, and we're going to animate the transform. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't. Yeah, so I'm gonna put it here on this end, and at the last frame we are going to right click or just double click this value, and it's at default. Oh shoot, it got rid of all the keyframes. It's not the same as in Fusion Standalone. Alright, so I'm gonna bring it to 0.5, 0.5. So we have what here? Alright, so let's play this back. While we only have the transform node, it should play back pretty well. Yeah, so that looks pretty bad at the moment. So I'm just gonna go one frame forward. Alright. So we'll fix this later with the splines, but what I want to show you now is we're going to get a different type of blur. Of course, you can use the motion blur. It's a lot easier inside the transform, or you can search for directional blur. So you have two kinds of directional blur here. I'm not sure which one's the better one. So I'm just going to add the first one. Because in Fusion, it's very common you have two kinds of the same thing. In Davinci Resolve, this wasn't the case in the standalone version of Fusion. So I'm going to animate the length, keep it at 0, and we're going to leave it at linear, and go to the last frame also, add a keyframe at the length, and we'd go somewhere towards the middle, and we would bring the length up. So that's basically our motion blur. And as for the XF chroma fuse, we would go to the same frame, animate the center, offset it just a little bit, and you don't see much aberration at the moment, so I'm just gonna offset it a little bit more. Yeah, so you don't see. I'm just gonna make the size a little small, a little larger. Let's make it a little bit larger so you can see the aberrations more. No one's even gonna notice this part, so alright, so here are aberrations. It's a little bit better. So I'm gonna go here to the last frame, set this to 0, and I believe I should set this to 0.5 here. Here I should have set a keyframe for the size, just a little bit bigger, and create a keyframe. Too big, something like that. That creates those chromatic aberrations that we were talking about. Alright, and here at the first frame we are going to set this to default, and this we're going to bring to 0. You just do 0.5 and it'll automatically make it 0.5. Alright, so we have our next transition. This is our zoom pen. So we already made 3 transitions. So I'm going to go to the spline window, select all of this again, the transform, the XF chroma, and the directional blur. So the directional blur and the zoom blur are a little bit faster than using the motion blur that's built into the transform fuse. But if you want the best results, I would recommend that you use the motion blur that's in the transform. It looks more realistic and I really like it a lot better than that. But if you need something to like reference, if you're trying to see what it's going to look like and you need fast playback, you can use these extra nodes and it'll be fine. But for the final render, I would recommend using the motion blur. So I'm just going to click Shift S, and all of our points are smoothed out. So playback, of course, is going to be pretty slow. So I'm just going to go one frame forward. All of the nodes get to refresh. We have this. Another frame forward. Another frame forward. And that's our transition. So we made 3 transitions today. But the point of this tutorial was not how to make transitions. There are a lot of videos out there that show how to make transitions. The point of this video was to show how to make the chromatic aberrations inside the transitions, how to make it easy, quick, and without pulling your hair out. So this is our XF Chroma fuse, and you can get this on Reactor. It's a really great fuse, and I would recommend it. Anyone who wants to make chromatic aberrations, it's worth a lot. So with this adjustment clip, if you want to make another one, you would just copy it and paste it to a different place. What I saw Alex do is that he would drag this to the media pool, but this seems to work only on Mac for some reason. It doesn't work on Windows. I'm not sure why. But this works pretty well, and if I were to render this, you would see a zoom in, zoom out. We made a pan transition, and it works pretty well. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever we release a new tutorial. And if you like this tutorial, please share, subscribe, give a thumbs up, and I'll see you in my next tutorial.